Okay, class, to finish up this week's lectures, I'm going to do a really brief one here on crimes against the public, this sort of catch-all area of criminal law. First, I'm going to talk with the quality of life crimes. These are things that basically annoy people and make life less good for other people for these basic things that you probably shouldn't do. The first is disorderly conduct. This might be called disturbing the peace. Basically, we're saying anything that you do that is going to negatively impact other people is likely going to be covered here. Just these general being annoying, but so annoying that it's criminal, because plenty of people are annoying and it's not a crime. So what might be covered? It could be being loud, unreasonably noisy, maybe saying things that are obscene could get cut under here, or obscene gesturing. So if you're out in public making masturbatory gestures, you're likely committing disorderly conduct. Even engaging in fighting could be here, or threatening to fight, or stating fighting words, things that would reasonably cause someone to fight you. These things would be covered under disorderly conduct. It could also be creating a hazardous condition by an act that does not serve a legitimate purpose. So if you're doing something, perhaps setting a prank for someone to slip and fall down, this would follow under disorderly conduct. If you're cleaning the floor and you're mopping and someone might slip and fall down, you could be setting yourself up for a lawsuit, but you have a legitimate purpose there of cleaning the floor, and thus you are not committing disorderly conduct, even though you similarly would have caused someone to slip and fall. So you're going to have to be intending here to cause some sort of public inconvenience, annoyance, or alarm. Some places have a lower intent, where they maybe just showing that you are reckless in doing so would be enough, and it has to be in public. And the Model Penal Code defines public as affecting or likely to affect persons in a place to which the public or substantial group has access. So it might be in apartment buildings, businesses, neighborhoods, schools, highways. So a lot of places are public, and even being insanely loud in your own apartment, if it's so loud as to be causing alarm and annoyance and inconvenience to the people nearby, then you could be getting disorderly conduct. This is where the police show up for those complaints about loud parties. Why do they have a right to do that? Okay, if all you want is for people to turn down the music, and that's the only thing that could possibly come out of that, the police wouldn't get involved. That's something you as a person should go over and say, hey, can you turn it down? The reason the police get involved is because they're asking you to stop committing a crime, not to just stop being annoying, but you're actually doing something criminal, and they would like you to stop, or they will have to start doing police things, and you don't want them to start doing police things. Typically, disorderly conduct isn't going to be a very serious crime unless the defendant is trying to seriously harm someone. So you could think of situations where you could do some serious harm, but typically we're only talking about a low misdemeanor for these things. How might you challenge a statute that goes after something that covers so many different things? Well, the first is that it could be void for vagueness, right? It could be too vague. Just to reiterate, if a statute is too vague, it violates your 14th and 5th Amendment rights for due process, because you have to know what the law is against you. Again, if it is in the book, then you are presumed to know that it exists, but what's written there, whether you've ever seen it or not before this time, it needs to make sense. So if the law says, don't be rude, that's the law. So intentionally being rude, let's say that's what the statute says. What is being rude? Right? That is a subjective thing. Not everyone agrees on what is rude and what isn't, especially when you're spanning generations and cultures. These things change quite a bit. And so a statute that only said that and didn't give any more detail is likely going to be void for vagueness. Such a statute might also be overbroad, because there are ways that you can be pretty rude while exercising your freedom of speech. So this is something that you could do, and thus that statute would also be overbroad, because it would prevent you from doing something that you could do and something that you would have no reason to do. For example, a statute that says, do not intentionally be rude, okay, that's essentially the rule. We're saying, yeah, that's too vague, but putting that aside for a moment, prevent you from going up to someone and telling them that their mother is overweight. Okay, you could say that, but that would be being rude, and under that statute, it would be under this disorderly conduct statute that said don't be rude. But instead, if you went up to someone and said that the governor is a moron, vote for the governor, or you are a moron too, well, that's going to be protected under your First Amendment. I think most people would agree that going and saying that would be quite rude, even if the governor happened to be considered by most to be a moron. It would still be a rude thing to do if we said that wasn't vague, okay? So this is that same statute. There's these two different things you could do. One is protected, one is not, and that's why the statute would be overbroad, in addition, as we already said, for being too vague, because rudeness is subjective. And a general First Amendment protection here is that if you're not getting into something that's obscene, and that has to be fairly obscene, or it's going to be difficult to uphold it as such, because it's going to have some pretty specific language as to the obscenity. If it's not really threatening someone, or if it's not really inciting violence, it's not really fighting words, anything that's not there is going to be protected under your First Amendment right. So again, you could go and say that thing about the governor, and no one could stop you. It's probably not likely to pick a fight, but if someone wanted to take a video of you saying that and put it on YouTube, and trolls comment about all sorts of jokes about you and how terrible you are, you don't have a First Amendment right against that. You are out in public doing this thing. You have no right against someone showing everyone what a jerk you are. So the First Amendment is only going to protect you from that act being criminal. It's not going to protect you from other people hating you for doing that. Vagrancy is a bit of an interesting crime, because pretty much everywhere has some punishments against this. It might be vagrancy, it might be just loitering, but often they can be too vague or overbroad or target a particular group. Because when we're talking about vagrancy, what we're talking about a lot are homeless people. People who are unemployed and don't have anywhere to live. And we're basically saying, hey, person who has nowhere to live, you can't be out here on the street. But everyone else can, but you can't because we don't like you. And maybe people have reasons for saying that. Maybe the homeless people are hassling passersby, maybe not really rudely, but shaking their coin cups, asking for spare change. Maybe they smell bad because they don't have access to showers. There are reasons that people don't want homeless people hanging out by the streets. But if we target just these people loitering in an area with no apparent purpose, if the statute says you can't loiter in an area with no apparent purpose, what does that even mean? So that's pretty vague. But if the statute names specific things, like they don't want you begging for money or sitting here for a certain amount of time, it's likely that the statute is targeting homeless people or certain people, and if certain people are being targeted, then we get into the realm of equal protection. And we talked about what those tests are, and it would just depend on what that group is that's being targeted. If they're a highly protected group, there might be strict scrutiny. If they're not, then we might be talking about a rational basis test being applied. The reason I'm talking about equal protection here is that everyone should have equal protection under the laws, and thus there shouldn't be some laws that apply to some people and are designed only to apply to some people, but not to others. Then we get into the area of equal protection. And there was an example in the book about the sit-lie statutes, which are basically saying no sitting and lying down on streets. Okay, this is clearly anti-hobo law. I checked fairly recently on San Francisco's sit-lie statutes. They still have a citywide ban. The police are going to be acting on this law only in well-to-do areas where people have influence over what's going on in the city. So there will be a lot of areas where people are sitting down and not doing anything, and the police never hassle them. And certain areas, probably where the people who have businesses there or live there are pressuring the police to enforce this law. What this is going to do, even if constitutional, is going to take a bunch of resources to move around a bunch of people who are just sitting there and not really committing any crimes. These people are sort of eyesores that we want to pretend don't exist, but they do exist, right? So best case scenario, we use police resources and these people end up homeless in a different location, maybe a few blocks away. So they're not really effective at changing these things. for panhandling in particular, if you say not to beg, we're going to be getting into First Amendment territory. That's why some places like Denver have coin meters out downtown that say don't give money to homeless people. If you put money in this machine, that money will be donated to this community group we have to take care of homeless people. And thus you see far fewer homeless people out there because the city's saying, hey, don't give to them, give to us, and then we will manage the money for them and give it to shelters and food kitchens and all that. So that's a way around this. It's a way of curbing that behavior because people aren't going to be out there begging for money if people are not giving them the money. No one sits around begging somewhere if they never get anything. And so that's a way that a city can curb a behavior without making a protected activity illegal. Unlawful assembly and failure to disassemble. This is really interesting because the right to peacefully assemble is guaranteed in the First Amendment. So as long as you're being peaceful, this is a constitutional right. What are you doing if you're committing a crime while assembling? So first you have to be assembling. You have to have a meeting or a group. What constitutes a group is going to depend on the jurisdiction. It could be as few as 2 people. You might need as many as 5 people. Model Penal Code says 3 people is enough to be a group. So how many people you have is going to depend on jurisdiction. We'll stick with the idea of 3 because it's in the Model Penal Code, but you would want to check the statute. You have to purpose to commit some sort of breach of peace, some other unlawful act, or rioting. And so this could be, doing something that's going to be disturbing to the community. The second one here is pretty heavily aimed at gangs who gather up and then either maybe sell drugs or do certain things that are illegal. They would say, look, officer, I'm not doing anything, but they are likely doing an unlawful assembly here based on a statute like this, or preparing to riot. Any of these things would be assembling that you can't do because assembly has to be peaceful. But there's another aspect to this. You also have to disassemble when an officer or some other public servant orders the group to stop. If the conduct is likely to cause substantial harm, serious annoyance, or alarm, they need to disassemble once you are asked. And depending on when this is and where this is and how many people you have, it's really just going to depend on the circumstances as to whether your rights can be curtailed like that. It's going to depend on what you're doing. And we will talk a little bit more about that in your First Amendment rights when we talk about these things in class. So shortly here, the constitutional challenges with this is that your First Amendment right comes into play here with assembly because it's built right in, and then we have a lot of these things that are either void or overbroad, and we'll get some more examples of those in class as well. And finally, drugs. We're going to save most of our discussion about drugs for in class because there are a lot of different nuances to it, although in short, really simply, all drug crimes are really going to take is possession. You possess and you've done it, and that's usually going to be enough. But we will get into these sex and drug crimes in class because why not talk about sex and drugs in class? That's all I have for you for this week's lectures. I'll see you in class.